So this poem on finding a small fly crushed in a book has a very strange title, as you might have realised. It's quite typical of more old-fashioned poems to start with this word on, and usually if a poem starts with that word on, it's kind of a reflection or a meditation on something. So a really famous poem that does this is On Looking into Chapman's Homer by Keats, and basically that's a poem where he's reading a book of epic poetry by Homer that is translated by a guy called Chapman, and the word on sort of suggests that he's looking into that book, he's meditating and reflecting on why that book was important to him. So yeah, usually this kind of form of poetry, this type of meditation, is reserved for really profound, important moments or significant, uplifting works of art or important experiences that people have had in their lives that they want to capture. So we automatically have an element of anti-climax here because it's very strange that this is about a guy who is looking in a book, but it's not about the book itself, it's about finding a small fly that's been crushed between the pages. And for most people, it probably seems strange that that would be a significant moment in this speaker's life. So automatically, we're kind of curious about why this is a profound moment that needs to be turned into poetry. So we'll look a little bit more into the poem now and figure out what's going on, why is the fly so important. So even though it's a more old-fashioned language, because like I say, this is a more traditional form of poetry, particularly popular in the 1800s to the 19th century. So it has these kind of older words and older phrases there, but you should be able to kind of roughly understand what's going on in this poem. So thee means you, thou also means you, thy means your. And I think apart from that, it should be roughly understandable. So I want you to just pause me now and read the poem aloud to yourself and try and understand what the speaker is thinking and feeling about this fly. So when he says thee, the addressee, the person he's speaking to, is actually the fly itself. Some hand that never meant to do thee hurt has crushed thee here between these pages penned. So somebody's hand didn't actually mean to kill you, but has accidentally crushed you here. So you can pause me and read the poem. See if you can get an understanding of the situation. So what is the speaker precisely thinking or feeling about this moment where he finds the fly in the book? Yeah, so hopefully you've kind of read that aloud and you've got some ideas about it. The first section of this poem, if I kind of go to the summary here, it might kind of be a bit clearer as well, is about the fact that this surprise has happened. So the guy's found this fly crushed between these pages. He wasn't expecting to find it there. Initially, he's kind of sad because the fly's life has just randomly ended completely by chance. Then he's kind of curious because the fly's left a smudge on the page. You've left your own fair monument, so that the wings of the fly kind of gleam out on the page, and they are defined in a way that the person looking in the book can tell what that animal was, what that creature was. I don't know if a fly is exactly an animal, insect. And then something profound happens, so this is why this actually is a significant moment or an important moment. So he realizes that the smudge that the fly leaves behind in death is kind of like its legacy, its lasting impression that is a sort of trace or remnant of its existence on Earth. And he wishes that actually his own memories that outlive him on Earth, so when people remember him or the things that he leaves behind as a trace after he dies, would be half as lovely as the wings of the fly. So normally we would think of a fly as a usually kind of a gross or grotesque or at least annoying thing. Not many people find flies beautiful. But in this case, actually, the gleaming wings of this fly to the speaker in this moment actually are beautiful, partly because they serve as a reminder of this fly's life and of the kind of like shock or kind of fate that befell the fly. So the end of the poem, that's where we get the meditation. That's where it's a more philosophical reflection. Our doom is always near. The threat of death is beside us day by day. One day the book will close upon us too. So it's kind of like in life we're sort of flies, and randomly someone, probably a god, shuts a book on us. We just suddenly get snuffed out. And he thinks about whether this closing book moment, this moment where his own life ends, leaves a luster on his own page of death, which is that kind of repeated metaphor from the fly's wings that gleam as a reminder of the fly's existence. So that's quite a complex metaphor there, but he's basically just saying, I wish that I had a legacy. I wish that I'm remembered after my death, that things that I make outlive me, or memories that I create in other people's minds outlive my existence, and they kind of gleam or shine. They have a luster, which is like a kind of shininess after death. So it's kind of dark and a bit macabre, meaning, a word that sort of fixates a bit too much on death, I think, but also quite beautiful, quite interesting sort of meditation, I think, on mortality, on death, and the end of our own lives, our legacy, what we leave behind. I really like as well the use of the fly here. So I think this is actually more common in painting than poetry of the period, but you get a lot of paintings that are called memento mori. So these are like paintings that deliberately make you think about death. So usually we don't want to think about it and we just ignore it. But sometimes art or certain experiences in life encourage us to sort of bring the fact that we will die one day to the forefront of our minds. And when that happens, it can kind of really have a profound impact on our life. It can make us cherish how we use it. It can make us think, like the speaker here, more about how we'll be remembered or what we leave behind. So these paintings, quite often, the memento mori paintings, they'll have a fly in them, and the fly is a reminder of death and decay, because flies are sort of born out of decay, really. So I think he's drawing on that painting tradition as well, of the fly as symbolic of death itself. And then seeing the fly kind of triggers this this thought or feeling in his mind. So it's a tiny little poem, and it seems kind of silly at first, but actually makes you think quite deeply about a lot of things. So there's a little bit on the speaker here, if you're kind of wanting to know a little bit more about the speaker, or you're still kind of trying to get to terms with these ideas. So make sure you understand these words like mortality, legacy. He has a remorseful tone. He kind of feels sorry at first for the fly, but then actually he feels by the end that the fly is better than him in a way, because the fly has left something beautiful behind, and he's not sure whether he will be remembered after death, or whether he'll have any kind of impact. There's also this vocab, if you're not sure of some of the words, just because a few of them are quite old-fashioned. So feel free to just pause and look through that vocab if you want. This actually little fly I'm just going to zoom in on. This is an example of a fly that you would find in memento mori paintings. So that's kind of what they look like, that thing I was talking about earlier. So yeah, I think one of the cool things about this poem actually is that, we're reading it now, and the poet has died, and it's kind of like this poem is his legacy. So he has left something after he's died, and we are kind of experiencing the beauty of that now. So it's sort of like the poem itself is like the gleam that he leaves after death, which I think is quite beautiful. So yeah, quite a lot of language features. I'm not going to focus too much on these, I think, because the main thing about this poem and understanding it is that idea, the central idea of what's the speaker's relationship to the fly in that moment that he experiences. Yeah, I mentioned before metaphor. This is kind of a repeated metaphor, kind of a symbol as well. Sense of symbolism that the gleaming wings that kind of smudged onto the page are sort of like the way that life is a book that closes on us and we leave a smudge on life as we die. Like if you kind of think of it that way. It's a strange analogy, but I do kind of get what he means. And yeah, the visual imagery, there's some quite clear visual images here that help us picture the moment of the poem. So it's kind of, even though it's a lyric poem and that it expresses an idea or a thought about death, it's also sort of a narrative poem because we do have a sense of a story here. So the speaker opens a book, and then finds this fly. What I really like as well is that you don't actually know what book he's reading. It becomes irrelevant. The fly is more significant to him than the content of the book, which is a slight inversion of the traditional type of meditation poem. Like I was saying, on Chapman's Homer, for example, is about Keats reading Homer and finding it really profound, whereas this one is he found the fly, the book didn't even matter in the end. So it's like a slight inversion or twist of what we'd expect with this type of poem. So it's also a sonnet, which traditionally is used for love poetry. So you might want to think about love and if it applies to anything here. I think it kind of applies in terms of legacy and, the memories of us that live on in others after we die. I think when he's talking about that, we could interpret that as a sort of form of love. It's also an elegy because it's commemorating the death of the fly. It's sort of, about the fly and the fly's life. Normally, elegies are about significant people that really had a profound impact on the speaker. So it's interesting that this is about something so small and humble as a fly, but also it did genuinely have a profound impact. So it is a topic that is worthy of the elegy form, I would say. So yeah, you can call it an elegiac sonnet. Kind of put that in bold there for you. So yeah, quite a lot of other techniques as well for form and structure. One that you might notice is the caesura. Now thou art gone, full stop. That's what we call the caesura because it creates a break in the middle of the line. Our doom is ever near. Kind of short at this point, it's disjointed and disrupted the flow of the poem. Sort of like a shock, like the moment of realization the speaker has that, the fly is now gone, but his own doom is also near. It's not going to be too long till he dies himself. So it's very dramatic and abrupt and sort of shocking at that moment in the poem. Yeah, so sometimes you also get these things called vanitas paintings, which are sort of about like the vainness of humans, how sort of overconfident we are in our own abilities. Like we kind of walk around like we'll live forever or we'll stay young and beautiful forever, whereas actually time catches up with us. So a vanitas painting has a similar effect to the memento mori. If you're interested in memento mori, you can see down the left side there's a more of a analysis of that as well. And here I have a poem by Tennyson. So you don't have to do this task if you're really pressed for time, but if you have time, I would recommend doing it. So you notice that this guy's called Charles Tennyson Turner, the poet of the Fly poem. And he's actually the older brother of one of my favourite ever poets called Alfred Lord Tennyson, who is an absolutely phenomenal poet. So do please read him because I think everyone should read him. He's great. And yeah, Charles Tennyson Turner was not actually a super long-lasting poet that people study a lot, but in his time he was a relatively well-known poet. And he also was the vicar of a church, so he kind of was quite religious and spiritual. as well as being a poet. So you might kind of think about his church background and if that affects his interpretation of this fly instance as well. So on the right hand side, this task is a poem or a section of a poem. I don't know if it's the full poem, it might be actually, yeah. Full poem, Break, 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 which is an elegy as well. It's a commemoration of the death of Tennyson's friend Arthur Hallam, who actually had married Tennyson's sister. So this would also have been Charles Tennyson Turner's sister. And he died really suddenly and unexpectedly. Tennyson was completely distraught by this. He wrote a giant elegy to him as well. He wrote this little elegy, Break, Break, Break. So this is kind of like Alfred Lord Tennyson's response to death and, the surprising, untimely death of someone that you know or care about. So it's actually a really similar topic to On Finding a Small Fly Crushed in a Book, but also very different because it's so personal and it's so kind of human. So I want you to read this poem and then read On Finding a Small Fly Crushed in a Book again, and just compare and contrast those two and think about the similarities and differences in the attitudes or the opinions about death that are being presented in both of them. It's very, very intensely emotional, this one, whereas the other one is a little bit more kind of reflective and analytical, I think. So yeah, just to finish off then, some attitudes. So death is unavoidable, it's inevitable. We all die eventually. Even though it's sad or frightening to think about this, it also just makes us really value our lives. So you can take that in a sad way, like, be terrified of the fact that you might die one day, but it's not really helpful to your life. So the most useful thing you can do with the, knowledge of your own death that is inevitable is to think about, okay, how do I actually spend my life? Is it worthwhile every day that I spend or every hour that I spend? Try and cherish the moments that you have with people that you care about, or the really important moments in your life where something magical or miraculous happens. Try and create experiences that feel really fulfilling. Try and help others and make an impact in the world. So a reflection on the fact that we're going to die one day makes us really appreciate the time that we have. And I think this is the sort of moment of realization when the speaker in the poem notices the sort of fly. That's kind of what happens in his mind. He realizes, actually, I need to make an impression on life in some way. Also, death is kind of random and untimely. No one knows when they're going to die. Random things can happen that cause death, and again, can be terrifying, but it is also a sort of fact of life. So we have to kind of reconcile that and accept it as part of our existence. It also makes us think about consciousness. So the idea of a book closing is sort of like when the book opens, we start living and we're aware of things. When the book closes, it's kind of darkness, lack of knowledge. It's not exactly spiritual. It's not really kind of too deeply religious, but it has echoes of spirituality, with kind of like little tendencies towards spirituality, that idea. So, as another task, you can pick two of these themes and make little mind maps on them. You can choose the themes yourself. And just find little quotes from the poem and then analyze the quotes so that you're basically building up preparation for essays and exam questions. And then when you're ready, you can do these exercises as well that will help you open up the poem further. Finally, you can try planning and writing 1 or 2 essay questions at the bottom. So hopefully you really enjoyed this lesson and you're not too sad thinking about mortality. You're actually inspired. That's one of my goals, I think, with this lesson, to not freak people out too much and make them feel a bit more positive than negative about this idea. But yeah, personally, I find it a really profound little poem. Very kind of like silly on the one hand, but also quite deep on the other. So really interesting poem, I think. So if you need more help with English, go to scribbly.com and we have lessons there. We have recorded videos, we have example essays, there's options for tuition as well if you want tutoring. So there's all sorts of stuff on there that will help you further. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the poem, and I'll see you soon in a future lesson.